mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. He's Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network. And now, live from Austin, Texas, Alex Jones.
Welcome back, my friends, to the second hour of the broadcast. We're going to be joined by Noam Chomsky coming up here just a couple minutes. He is an Institute professor of linguistics and semantical syntax and philosophy of language at MIT in Massachusetts. And he's written books like Manufacturing Consent, an excellent video, also titled Manufacturing Consent. And it goes into how they stage things. How they will have a supposed debate on television, but the people debating are actually on the same side. They're just debating the exact implementation by just a few degrees, giving you the psychological illusion that there's really some type of difference, so that in your mind you're going to fall in supposedly either phony camp, being steered in the direction they wish. Now, that's how I put it. Chomsky does it in a little bit more sophisticated fashion, but they do this all the time. Just every level of propaganda you can imagine. He also gets into what the editors do with the newspaper articles, how television's controlled, and he comes to the same conclusion that we have, that it is a global elite controlling it and steering it and dumbing down the population and manipulating us with words. Words mean things. And this also fits into the whole moral relativism debate, because what does is mean with Bill Clinton? It's simply a way to neutralize any type of dissent. And it's working wonders upon the minds of the American people. It's like Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. Liberals, conservative, you look at what they do at the top, they're all the same people. The political left has secret police that wear black uniforms and ski masks. The political right has police that wear black uniforms and ski masks around the world. Centralized government, and they tell you to be in the middle of that system. More semantical deceptions. Always corralling thoughts and ideas. Giving you phony decisions, phony choices. That, my friends, is the essence of modern mind control. Behavioral modification. And until you realize that the sitcoms and the cartoons have more propaganda in them than the newspaper or the nightly news, you will not even begin to scratch the surface of the level of this inculcation, this soaking into the propaganda state. Every facet, every level, deluged, infested. The human mind's like a computer. Garbage in, garbage out. And they're training us with phony meanings for words. They are conditioning us to believe in a false political paradigm and system. That's basically what it boils down to. And Noam Chomsky calls it manufacturing consent. The phony choice between the Republicans and the Democrats. This huge globalist corporate state that claims that it's capitalist. How is it capitalist to use huge government international bureaucracies to go after your competition, to take in massive sums of corporate welfare, and then to be able to twist the debate into a fight over, aren't we going to take care of the poor? And that really has nothing to do with it. That's semantical deception, ladies and gentlemen. Joining us is Professor Noam Chomsky from MIT. Professor, it's a real honor to have you on the show.
Glad to be with you.
You bet. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about the studies you've done and some of the books you've written, and what type of system we live in today in your analysis.
Well, I have two parallel and separate lives. One of them is what they pay me to do at MIT, that's linguistics. The others, what they would probably pay me not to do, that's being involved in a whole variety of social and political issues, international affairs, the international economy, the foreign policy problems. just about anything you can think of that's in the front pages of the newspapers. And one part of that, which has interested me for many years, is kind of analysis of ideological institutions that includes the intellectual culture, but specifically the media, which I've spent a lot of time on. So it's that collection of topics. What kind of system do we live in? That requires an essay.
That requires an essay. Well, I would call it almost a matrix-like system where 98% of people don't even know the real parameters of power that surround them, phony paradigms and systems of phony left, right, with all the roads leading towards a centralized, highly controlled corporate bureaucracy.
I agree with that, but I think the only thing I would add as a kind of a footnote is that marginalization of the public that you're describing is quite purposeful and conscious, self-conscious. So, especially through the actually it goes back to the founding of the country, but it's particularly in the 20th century, there has been a very self-conscious, explicit effort. I mean, don't have to make it nothing speculative, because the leaders say so. Business leaders, intellectuals, academic, social scientists, and others say that it is important to keep the public out of things. It's important to ensure that the public remain what are called spectators, not participants. They're supposed to be directed to other concerns and not to interfere with policy formation. That is a major phenomenon developed in the more democratic countries, in the United States and England particularly, through the 20th century. And the reason was very clear. By the early 20th century, it was becoming very difficult to control people by other means. The voting franchise was extending. Labor unions were developing. Women were demanding the vote. I mean, it was the countries, especially England and the United States, were simply becoming more democratic. And it was recognized early on that if you can't control people by force or poverty or some other means, you are going to have to control them by what was quite openly called propaganda at the time. People don't like the term propaganda anymore, but that was used. I mean, that's where the U.S. public relations industry, it grows out of these experiences and this understanding, and it is very explicit.
So, Professor Chomsky, they put out their papers that I've read from the Carnegie Endowment and others, that mind control, behavioral modification is much cheaper and much more effective than tanks and guns.
And it's the only thing you can do, because in the more democratic countries, you can't control people with tanks and guns. I mean, maybe to some limited extent, but not very much. There's too much freedom. It was understood very well, and it is kind of striking that it's in the two main democratic countries, England and the United States. It was realized in parallel about the same time that you're going to have to control people by what was called regimenting the public mind, by ideological control. That's where the term manufacturing consent comes from.
Well, take Bush and Clinton. They have the exact same policies on land grabbing, selling out sovereignty, deindustrialization, drugging the children. But you ask the average person, they have this cult-like following of their parties and can't admit it's really the same, what I call the same, it's really two corporate management teams bidding for control of the CEO job of the New World Order.
Well, maybe I'm naive, but I have more faith in the public than that. My feeling is that the general public is rather well aware of this, and I think it shows up in there's a lot of public opinion study in the United States, mainly because business wants to keep its finger on the public pulse. They want to know what people are thinking. So we have a pretty trustworthy and very extensive polling industry. And what comes out of public attitudes, I think, is kind of revealing. So for the last 20 years or so, about 80% of the population, when they're asked, what do you think the country, who runs the government or what does it do, the answer that they pick out of a set of choices is the government works for the few and the special interests, not the people. And in fact, in the last election, just last November, there's a big project at Harvard University called the Vanishing Voter Project, where they study attitudes towards elections and so on. Right before the election, so this has nothing to do with shenanigans in Florida, before the election, about 75% of the population felt that there was no election going on in any sense that involved them. What was happening was some kind of game involving rich contributors, party bosses, the public relations industry, which crafts the candidates to say particular things and have particular gestures, which you can't believe what they say. And this was a large majority of the population.
And they wouldn't even let Ralph Nader into the debate when he had a ticket.
They wouldn't, and there was a huge attack against him, mainly from the kind of more liberal press, because he was regarded as disrupting the system of, basically two factions of one party. I mean, the two factions are different. I don't say that Democrats and Republicans are identical, but they share fundamental interests, and those are the interests of their corporate backers. Not very surprising, easy if it was otherwise.
And
but I think the one thing where I'm not convinced by what you say is that I think the public is largely aware of it.
Oh, no, sir, I agree with you. I know they're cynical. They know something's wrong. They smell the dead body under the floor, but they
don't know what to do. They don't feel they can. In fact, that's an important point, and I think you're right about that. One of the things that is measured in these studies is what's called helplessness. Like, do you feel there's nothing you can do about it? That figure has been going up, and it reached its historical peak last November.
Professor Chomsky, we've got to break. Coming up the next segment, I really appreciate you joining us because I'm obsessed with this stuff. It seems to be the only game in town. We really want to fight this. I want to talk about their modes of control, examples of propaganda, how they split people's minds and corral the information they receive. When we return with Noam Chomsky from MIT.
The Genesis Communications Radio Network proudly presents The Alex Jones Show, because there's a war on for your mind.
That's right. That's my motto. That's my slogan up on Infowars.com, my premier website. From Reuters, yesterday, invited as speakers, Bill Clinton and Tony Blair were groomed at the Bilderberg meeting before rising to fame as U.S. President and British Prime Minister, respectively. They go on to brag about how they run our country. I was a kook 3 years ago to talk about this huge corporate elite, and now they're throwing it in our face. Is that, Professor Chomsky, part of the hopelessness that they're trying to instill in us? I've seen a shift in the propaganda in the last 3 years from denying all of this to throwing it in our face.
Could be, but I think my own feeling is the roots go back farther. If you go back again to the early part of the 1920s approximately, that's when this stuff really takes off.
Madison Avenue?
That's when the public relations industry really exploded. And it grew on the basis of the very sensible assumption that was pretty clearly articulated, that we have to somehow make sure that the general public does not make use of the democratic opportunities that are available to them and leaves us to run the place as we've been doing. And the way to do it was, you read the business leaders are saying, look, we have to induce what's called a philosophy of futility. They actually use the phrase. We have to kind of direct people to superficial things like fashionable consumption. We have to regiment, anything that doesn't bother us.
Bread and circus.
Yeah, just anything like that. I mean, and that's true of leading intellectuals. I mean, take, say, Walter Lippmann, who was he's the leading figure in the U.S. Elite media in the 20th century, major public intellectual. He's the one who invented the phrase manufacture of consent. We borrowed it from him. And he thought it was necessary. It's necessary to manufacture consent in order to make sure that we, what he called the responsible men, can run the affairs of the world without being bothered. And what he didn't say, but what is crucial is your point, you become a responsible man if you're serving the interests of concentrated private power. Otherwise, you're not.
Professor Chomsky, during the break we were talking about, I just observed this, they will have somebody on TV, both sides are taking private property under the guise of environmentalism, and they're both really on the same side, but they act like this is the two choices, that there's an actual debate going on when it's not, controlling the entire system of thought. What do you call that?
Well, I think a sensible, like if you and I were to sit down and invent an effective system of source was so obvious that it couldn't believe it. The intelligent way to design a propaganda system is to present the illusion of debate, but within a fixed framework that you're not allowed to escape. So you start with certain assumptions. Everyone has to accept those assumptions or they're not admitted into the discussion. Once you accept those assumptions, you want to stimulate the most lively and intense debate and controversy, but ensuring that those assumptions are maintained. Anybody questions those assumptions, they're just not part of the discussion.
So
that's
we feel
an effective propaganda.
So we feel like we're part of the decision-making process when we're actually just cheerleading for what the elite wanted before.
Yeah, we're choosing among things that concentrated power really doesn't care that much about. I mean, you see this very clearly. I mean, take, say, one of the major issues for the public, look at polls, and it's understandable, are these international economic agreements, the things that are called free trade agreements. So that's not what they are. Those are very big issues for the public. People are very much worried about, the trade deficit because they know that affects their job.
China has a 40% tariff on us. We have a 2% on them. They call that free trade. You're not an isolationist, are you?
No, I'm not. But this is stuff has nothing to do with free trade.
No, but that's what they say. I mean,
yeah, that's what they say. Right, of course. Now, but what the point I'm trying to make is this: these are very big issues for the population. They are also big issues for the business world. But the population and the business world happens to be on opposite sides. Therefore, the issues do not arise in political campaigns. So, like, for example, the free trade area of the Americas, which is an enormous agreement, with a lot of consequences, that has yet to be discussed in the media. It's been negotiated for 3 years. It finally broke through at the Summit of the Americas meeting in Quebec. There was such a furor over it, had to be mentioned. But it's been under negotiation for a couple of years by corporate managers, by trade ministers of governments who are basically corporate representatives. The media know all about it, but they don't want the public to know. It did not come up in the political campaign. The nature of these arrangements has yet to be made public. I mean, you can sort of figure it out if you do a research project. But these things are not made available to the public, and it's for a very clear reason.
Our final segment with the professor with solutions coming up. Welcome back, my friends. We've only got about 8 or 9 minutes left, really about 5 minutes left with our guest, Noam Chomsky, professor from MIT, one of the experts there on the globalists and their activities manipulating our minds. Sir, other key areas of manipulation that people can become conscious of, because we become conscious of this propaganda, it actually becomes, in my experience, an irritant, as you were saying earlier, in Russia, and acts against them. And then what are some solutions to counter this?
Well, I think the main solution is the kind of thing you're doing. I mean, people have to be offered the opportunity and encouraged to take the opportunity to think critically, not to believe, not to uncritically accept what you're told, to ask the question, what are the assumptions? Do I accept those assumptions? To search for information and analysis over a wide range. I wouldn't want anybody to believe what I'm saying. I mean, they should ask, is it true? Let's find out if it's true. Let's check out that information from a variety of sources. When you have a radio, it can be a very important, it's an extremely important instrument. There can be real involvement and interchange, and that can be an highly important educational instrument, and there are others.
So it's not just sound bites. People have to actually espouse ideas.
No, these are not trivial issues. You have to really think them through. The thing that I mentioned, for example, the international economic agreements, those, you have to think about them. You have to learn about them. You can't just listen to a slogan and say, okay, that's what I think.
Well, these are unelected, unaccountable international boards controlled by the top 20 corporations and banks telling us they're going to run our lives. That's a horrible idea, but most Americans don't know that.
Yeah, but they can find out. They can find out. The information is available. You have to work to get it. It's an extremely hard thing to do by yourself. If people are really atomized and separated from one another and spending their entire lives, trying either to put food on the table or to get deeper in debt with things they are told to buy but don't want, then they really are controlled. People have to be able to get together. Even in the sciences, the way you come up with ideas is by working together. You don't sit alone somewhere and have to figure out how the world works.
Well, that's like these $150 Nike tennis shoes that are so ugly I wouldn't touch them if they were free, but the young people are just begging and have to have them or they're not human.
Yeah, and if you watch, I mean, I sometimes watch with television with my grandchildren. What they are subjected to is criminal. I mean, they're barraged by propaganda, teaching them from infancy that the only thing in life is getting those tennis shoes or those Pokemon cards or whatever it may be, and that's, you know, that is really a way to control people in a very ugly fashion. People have to learn how to escape from that. It's a hard struggle.
What are some of the other facets, other propaganda venues and systems they use against us?
Well, I mean, if you look at the way issues are, all the way from the elite media to the educational system to commercial propaganda.
I found that sitcoms and drama shows are full of the most. I mean, I was watching NYPD Blue Monday night or Tuesday night, and they were choking and torturing someone, saying, we'll frame you, and these are the good guy heroes doing it. Then I read a law enforcement magazine, they're saying, hey, we might need to institute torture.
Yeah, well, I agree. I mean, I don't know much about, you know, it's a part of the culture I just don't know much about, but I'm sure you're right that the framing and the structure of sitcoms and popular entertainment is designed, and probably consciously designed, to instill a certain kind of attitude, interest, concern that will marginalize people, that will keep them away from the basic decisions and choices about how to run their lives and how to run their society. Because the idea is that's not supposed to be in the public domain. That's supposed to be in private, powerful circle. And take, say, these trade agreements that are coming along. One crucial part of them is to take what are called services and hand them over to private power. Well, services are just about anything that people would care about. You know, health, education, water, almost anything that would be in the arena, in the public arena, where people would want to make decisions. That has to be taken out of the public arena, put into private hands, unaccountable private hands, and then, you know, what's left for the public is which kind of shoes I buy.
But these private corporations are taking on governmental power, and take the Lower Colorado River Authority here in Texas. They're private, but they have SWAT teams and will arrest you.
That's right.
And it's the ultimate tyranny. And then they say, hey, we're a corporation. You can't see our records.
That's right.
You can't ask questions. Two more quick questions, sir. I want to bring up a fact. Okay, semantics. You say democratic countries. Okay, fine. I hear Republicans, Democrats saying democracy. That's a semantical deception. The Founding Fathers said a democracy is horrible. It's two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. A republic has a rule of law, separation of powers, a Bill of Rights that you can't violate. In a democracy, 51% say all the black people are killed or all the white people are killed and it's done. Or take that farm, it's done. Right there, I mean, we hear this word democracy all the time. Well, we're a republic and there's a big difference.
Actually, I think the real issues are elsewhere. I mean, the distinction between republic and democracy that you're describing was not really what concerned the Founding Fathers. What they were concerned about, you read, say, James Madison, the main framer, what he was concerned about was he wanted to have a system in which power would lie in the hands of what he called the wealth of the nation, the more capable class of men. And the reason was because the goal of government, this phrase, is to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. So the system was designed to try to ensure that the wealth of the nation would essentially be in control and that the general public would be fragmented and marginalized and so on. Now, if you look over the course of time...
A middle class flourished here, though, Professor.
Yeah. Pardon?
The middle class flourished here. 4% of the population with half the wealth.
Well, that's not the middle. 4% of the population isn't the middle class. The middle class is the middle. But I think, look, over the centuries, there have been a lot of struggles against this elitist concept, and the options for public participation did increase substantially.
But was it elitist for them to say that we would all be armed and have the right to keep and bear arms?
Well, that's not what they meant back at that time. What they meant is, you read the Second Amendment, they said, in the context of raising militias, people should have the right to bear arms. We're living in a different world. We're not raising militias. The question whether people should have arms is a separate issue. I mean, in fact, here the United States is off the spectrum of international society.
Do you think people are hopeful? Are you hopeful that folks are going to wake up to this system?
I think people, again, like I say, maybe I'm naive, but I think that people more or less understand it. And what they feel is helpless. And they have to be able to overcome that feeling of helplessness. And there are ways of doing it. In the past, people have organized, they have struggled, they've achieved rights. We have all kinds of rights and freedoms that didn't exist not long ago. And that's because people were not willing to just sit back and take it, but to organize, learn, act, educate, do things to change the world so that it fits their concerns and needs. We have the opportunity to do that. I mean, we're very privileged. We live in a society where, people are not controlled by force. That's an extremely important privilege.
Well, Mr. Chomsky, I have to be honest with you, and I really appreciate you coming on. I want to tell folks about some of your publications and then let you get back to work. But right there, it seemed like a groupthink herding mechanism when you talked about the guns, and you said, well, I think America, the U.S., is, off from, the main line of the rest of the world, as if, we're a little backwards that we still have guns. I mean, that's that whole groupthink right there.
It could be. I mean, I don't think it's an obvious question, and I think we'd really have to talk about it and think it through. But if you want my opinion, I think guns are much too easy to get in the United States. But
England's crime rate just doubled 3 years after they took all the guns.
Well, see, the United States does not have a particularly high crime rate. It's been sort of toward the high end of the spectrum of industrial societies, but not out of range. The one real difference between the United States and other countries is killings with guns. That's
not anymore.
Very high. It's very high here as compared to other countries.
Look at The Economist. No longer. We're number 12. England and Australia are number 1 and 2 now.
In deaths by guns?
Yes, now they are.
I don't think
London is now more dangerous. Only in the last 3 years. It wasn't 3 years ago. You're right, 3 years ago. It's now worse than Washington, D.C., sir.
In deaths by guns?
Yeah, I have about 4 different universities, 3 different governments, Australian Bureau of Statistical Data. It's all on Infowars.com right now, Professor.
Okay, I'd take a look. But if that's the case, I'd look at the reasons, and I would suspect that the reason is that there has been an increased availability of guns. If there's going to be an increased availability, then there are going to be crimes using guns.
You're right, sir. They outlawed the guns, and so now the criminals...
They've always had guns outlawed.
So now the criminals have a reason to bring them in because the black market's made it very lucrative.
I don't think guns were always outlawed. I mean, even the police didn't have guns in England until very recently.
Oh, people had guns over there?
No, look, in England, even the police were not armed with guns until fairly recently.
Professor Chomsky, the police didn't have guns. The people had handguns and rifles. They just confiscated them 3 years ago.
No, that happened. There was an effort to do that in Canada, but that's a different story. I mean, look, this is a big issue, and we'd have to look into the details of the facts, but I really don't agree with you about the facts here.
Well,
but, these are factual questions. We could settle it.
I have the facts. Well, I'd love to debate you on it. Real quick, tell folks about some of your books and publications.
Pardon? Sorry, I didn't hear.
Books and publications. Tell folks about them.
There is the book that you mentioned before, Manufacturing Consent. A new edition of that is coming out. It's about these issues of propaganda and mind control. That's coming out in a couple of months. The last book that appeared was one that was called Rogue States, but it's actually about it concentrates on the United States and on human rights issues and foreign affairs issues, and argues you can read it and see if it's right.
What about websites?
Pardon?
Websites.
There are plenty of websites. There's one called VNet, which has a ton of material, including a lot of my things, and it has accesses to archives in which these things are available, and there are others.
All right, Professor Chomsky, really do appreciate you joining us. I would just say this. One big part of controlling the thought process and the debate, where the rat thinks it has a choice, it can go forward, left, right, or back, but it's still in their system, is having people out there talking about this propaganda state in Madison Avenue and only pointing out certain parts of it and then misdirecting people back into the big government paradigm. And frankly, sir, you need to get the information on the guns, on the land grabbing, on all of it, because I have it right here, and I respect your work, but at the same time, just here talking to you, I think some of it isn't as honest as it could be.
Well, that's for others to decide when they look at it. Yeah.
Certainly is. Yeah. My audience is pretty well educated. Thanks for joining us. Say hi to David Rockefeller for me. There goes Noam Chomsky, ladies and gentlemen, and I've read his books, and now I'm more sure of it than ever. He's a New World Order shill, up one side and down the other. Oh, they never had guns in England. Oh, no, they never had guns in England. They most certainly did. Certainly gun ownership wasn't as prolific. I mean, how many... you've seen the video that's been on nationwide of them cutting the guns in half over there, confiscating the handguns, the rifles. 3 years ago, we've read the reports, The Economist, WorldNet Daily, Sydney Express, Bureau of Statistical Data. We spent obnoxious amounts of time on it. Washington, D.C. has the highest crime rate in the country, total gun ban. And Chomsky sat there and tried to use groupthink on us. Well, I think we're out of the mainstream of the rest of the world having these guns. Now, if you ask me, I think they're too available. He goes, well, I would say the crime rate's gone up in England because of availability. For criminals, yes, because they made them illegal, and now the black market value has exploded. Yeah, I had to spank him there at the end, and I certainly enjoyed it. Chomsky, you're a New World Order shill, and I've got twice the brain you've got with both arms tied behind my back. I tell you, these people, it makes me want to puke. Our founding fathers were elitist. They wanted to protect the elite. They were bad. I go, funny. 4% of the world's population, 50% of the wealth. We own land over here. We've got guns. Our crime rate's much lower than the rest of the industrialized world now. And he's sitting there going, well, I don't really agree with that. Woo. I'm like, here's fact this, fact B, fact C, fact Z, fact Q. Bam, bam, bam. Ooh, I'll check it out, but I don't think... What do you think about what Noam Chomsky said? We got about 25 minutes until our next guest joins us about giving nuclear reactors to China while our power is getting turned off.